So, we are here. This is a special meeting on the 22nd of October, 2024. Judy, if you want
Indeed. Stokes.
to. I am here.
Woolen.
Here.
Brown. Here. Josh.
Here.
Gustafson. Here. Also present, Village Manager Burns, Zoning Administrator Ed Leatherman, Project Lead Elise Shardulo, Tiffany Heiser here from Shared Resources, and did I not? Meg Leatherman, Planning and Zoning Administrator. What do you got? No, you're like in your first name. Thank you. Michelle Robinson, Finance Director.
She's nervous. You're nervous.
No, I have to write down every single roll call, every single name, every time. And I did not do your first name either this time or last night.
You could just take a name fun.
Mickey. It's probably Mickey.
I don't know what
I think
we
I'm a lot.
Alrighty.
Is this being recorded?
Good?
Okay.
Okay, I was just checking.
Big Brother is watching somewhere. Anyway, so welcome everyone. We appear to be all present and almost accounted for. So we're going to start off with an introduction to the budget process, and it's like our finance director, Michelle Robinson, and her colleague Tiffany Heiser will run this part of the meeting.
So we've been working for probably the past month on the budget process. We have asked for and received help from Shared Resource Center Services. They were approached a couple years ago about helping with the budget, and they came in, did a presentation, and that's where it went. It stopped. So we reached out to them again, and they have been helping myself and Johnny, since we're both fairly new to this process. They've helped us along the way, and this is Tiffany, and I'll let her take it from there.
All right, so my name is Tiffany Heiser. I'm with the Shared Resource Center. We provide, just as a high-level overview for those of you, I think many of you know, we provide financial services to all walks of local government, school districts, township villages, cities, finance oversight. And we can do, in fact, we can help with payroll, accounts payable, receivable, finance director, finance planning, process review, all that kind of stuff. We have about 25 staff members and work in various shapes and form across the region. And so we are thrilled to be here. We had been here before and done a kind of a finance plan overview, and I had the opportunity to meet Johnny then. And so we're back and we've been working with your team here to help build both a budget that'll hopefully be implemented in 25, but also a longer-term financial outlook for the organization that kind of gives a roadmap of what our trend has been and where we think it's going to go by fund, by department, by initiative, but also help you all kind of govern and help direct the ship. So you have in your packets a two-sheeter that is the general fund. It's got some green coloring on it. You'll see that top section is the revenue. And then down below, you'll see the expenses broken out. I think I'll jump over to the computer here in a second. But we've met with quite a few different people here trying to build out what makes sense, what are the projects, the capital initiatives, those kinds of things that'll be captured in the document to help plan for the year among us. But I think it warrants mentioning that what this is not is every budget line. And so each of the lines represented here may have a multitude of lines that go with it. So I'll just say a high level wages. You'll see a line in here for council wages. You'll see a line in here for admin wages. There may be 5 or 6 budget lines that make up that one number, but for the sake of planning, it's rolled into wages. And so a little different, I think you're used to seeing the whole chart of account when you do the budgeting process. A little different perspective is a little bit higher, and so you get a feel for what the wages are by department respective to each particular grouping of accounts, if you will. And so we can dive in, and we have all the historical data. We could dive in at your desire, but at a highest level, that's kind of what we're going to look at today.
Sounds good.
All right, I'll jump over here. So the first screen that I'm going to show you captures, and there's a lot of colors. for me, not you putting that. There'll be a lot of colors in your screen, and I like colors in spreadsheets, so hopefully you can follow. Each one of these, and I'm gonna stand, sorry, each one of these represents a different fund, other than these bottom two, capital and minor, those are a collection of funds. And so your general fund here, your street fund, your park fund, your water fund, and what this is giving you, other than a lot of colors and maybe a headache, is your cash balances respective to each of your funds. Historically, we have 22, 23. 24 is the first year of the plan because we're currently in fiscal year 24 or calendar year 24. And then what we're talking about is 25. So what you can see is over the course of the years, you've gone from an $11 million budget, and what we're projecting today, if the budget were to be implemented as is, would be an ending cash balance of $8.3 million. Okay, but you can see respective to each of the funds, the general fund stays, above. So if you look 338, 32, 37, we're balanced in the general fund for the year. Does that make sense? All right, we'll come back to this page. I just wanted to orient you to its highest level. From an administrative perspective, these are the kinds of things we'll look at to make sure that we have cash on hand to cover operations that we have. Further then, it jumps into revenue, and you can see by fund, the same level of funds, what we expect our revenue to do over the course of the next 3, 5, and out 10 years. So revenue from the general fund went from $4.4 million in 22. Our projection for 25 is to be just under $5.5 million of revenue for the year. And you can see what the street fund is doing. That one obviously doesn't have as much of a revenue source lined up to it because it's going to be largely funded through the general fund initiatives. But then you can see what Parks Water, some of our service funds have. Obviously, the affordable housing is new. We didn't start with much of a fund there. We have since 24 kind of brought on the books, so to speak, affordable housing. So you'll see that, and then on through the rest of them. All of, or not all of, but the majority of our capital initiatives are going to come down here to this capital fund. And then we have a host of minor funds. Green Space Fund, Widows Fund, there's a computer fund, there's a whole bunch of small, monetarily speaking, small funds that we have captured on that fund. All right, that's at its highest level, a big overview. We're going to dive into the general fund. Before I do that, any questions?
Not really. Although, in terms of revenue, I see from 22 up till now at the top, for the general fund, I see growth, and then it drops in.
Yep.
Is that just a conservative projection for it to be lower?
So we'll get into that. I'll tell you, this is one where we did an advance, and we'll get into this when we dive into the details. We did an advance this year, $545,000, that we expect to be returned to the general fund in 25. That is what I would consider to be an artificial inflation of your revenue stream. We're just taking it from the general fund, transferring it over here until this other money comes in, and then we'll transfer it back to the general fund. And so that's $545,000. And the other big loss here is going to be our interest earnings. Not knowing what's going to happen with the Fed rate, not expecting to get as high of a return. We're projecting a little bit of a decrease in our revenue streams. Other than that, we know our LGF fund is going to be a drop, although it's a minimal amount. And there's some other projections that we think are going to drop given various circumstances or data points that we have here in the village. We'll go through that.
Okay, great.
But good question.
And the affordable housing, loss in place is rolled into that. It was up in the general fund, and now it's down in affordable housing as well.
Correct.
Yeah.
Great.
All right, so this is the sheet, the shoulds, and can everybody see this up here well enough? Because I can make those numbers bigger if I need to. And so this has 10 years of history that go out here, so we can show you what we think is going to happen, but I consolidated it to what you have here. So at any point, if you want to see what the next 9 years, represent for us, we can definitely pull that out. So I'm going to dive in, and as I go, please ask questions. I am obviously here for you all, so not the other way around, so please. Property taxes, there was a big reevaluation that happened. I know you all probably are very intimately aware of that. And we project a slight increase in your collections there for your property tax. And then, but it's a modest increase based off of your property tax collections. And then your homestead and rollback will follow suit with that. It's shown a slight reduction there, but we think that it's the calculation or the anticipation 24 is a recapture of some old revenue expected. Income tax then is our biggest revenue driver, and so we have a 2.5% increase baked in for the growth. So this year we're expecting to get about $2.3 million. We expect next year to see about a 2.5% cost of living increase or COLA adjustment revenue increase for the organization to result in a $2.357 million collection. Again, those two things together, property taxes and income taxes, are our biggest revenue sources in the village, and so we spend a lot of time trying to assess what we think is going to happen with those two data points. All right, LGF, that's the local government fund. We already got certification from the county auditor. We know that that fund or those funding sources have been declining for years now. No surprise, unfortunately for us, is there's going to be another small decrease in what we expect that collection to be. And that's just as a result of the decrease in the income tax, the collection, and then therefore the distribution to us being lower from a state level than what it's been. The kilowatt tax, we expect to be a little bit higher this current year and hold in 25, and so you'll see that reflected in the numbers. The hotel tax is one of those taxes, President, that we were talking about. We had initially planned on seeing a little bit more revenue in 24 off of the hotel tax. We actually backed that off a little bit because what we're seeing is not lining up with the hotel tax revenue that we had seen in 23. There's some factors that I know both Johnny and Michelle are aware of, but some of the places where we were collecting that hotel tax are no longer on the market. I think there's some Virgo properties and some other things that are no longer available or not available at the same level that they once were to rent, and so our tax collections for hotel decrease. Fees, fines, and permits, and this is the place where we increased our anticipated revenue for 24, and we hold it for 25. There's some new development which is causing our permits to increase. For this year, we expect that to hold for 25. We expect that in 26 that to decline again, back to more in line with the $90,000 range. And I don't, Johnny and Michelle, you could speak to those development pieces, but what we're seeing this year is sizably an increase. The piece that I think it warrants mentioning, and you'll see it down below, so too then do our expenses. Anytime people are pulling more permits, although it's more revenue for us, it's also an additional expense for us. And so you'll see both of those lines kind of in synchrony go up together and then come back down together. Interest earnings, this is one of the things I alluded to. We had a good return in 2013. We believe that we're going to see to the tune of about $600,000 of interest earnings with the Fed rate cut last month, 6 weeks ago, something like that, and anticipating possibly another one. Not knowing, we know that the rates have adjusted a little bit with that rate cut, and so we're a little bit apprehensive to be aggressive with what we expect that interest earning to be. That is a place, I'm just going to tell you, that is a place where if you pushed me, I would say, yeah, I think that's probably a place that's a bit conservative, but it's not overly conservative. There's just not a lot we can do other than diversify our investments to manage to that. And so it's a place that I'd like to see us return a little bit better than what we promised, because if the other is true, then it could be bad move financially for the organization.
Right.
The next couple are pretty simple. Cable franchise, inline, and holding. Same with our reimbursements, other. And then down here, you'll see this $545,000 That's for the House Bill 168 that we made in 24 this current year that we expect to collect in 25. I'll tell you, and Johnny, I don't know if you can speak any more of this, we built it in here to be returned in 25. That doesn't mean it actually will be returned in 25. That's our best estimation.
So that was a loan for House Bill, or a transfer for House Bill 168. The project's due to be done, the first project's due to be done November, but they could go on with doing services until March. We don't think they will, but that is just for advance payments because we had to pay them to be able to be reimbursed. So I don't know that we're going to get it all returned in 24 because it takes about 30 to 45 days. So, but hopefully it will all be returned in 25.
All right. That's revenue. Are there any questions?
One question on income tax
Yep.
projections.
Yeah.
So do we have enough data on do you know about the change in the reciprocal tax? Did you guys talk about that?
Go ahead. I mean, I'm
So I
aware.
guess I wonder if we have enough data on that to know how big
Yeah.
that projection is.
I can look into it for sure. I know the right people. Admittedly, I would have to reach out.
Yeah, so we basically made it that, we only cover 50%.
Oh, that's,
1.5%.
yep.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Absolutely. All right, we're going to dive into expense. And I think it warrants mentioning that the way that the books are ordered, we tried to align it here. And so you'll see breakdowns, and I think this probably lines up with how, looking at Gavin and Brian, because we spoke about this a couple days ago, but you'll see council has their budget, then you'll see admin has a budget, and zoning, everybody has a budget. So we'll run through that, or at least has line items. So council is here. You can see it rolls up to the line just above. So this line is council's total budget allocation. So we went from 280, 274, 327, and then back down to 324. And I think the other piece that I want to mention when we go through this process, there were places where I would tell you, I think 24's budget was a little bit inflated, not from a spend perspective, but from a planning perspective. Not always when you budget does the money get spent, 100%. So you may budget $10,000 for one thing, and what you're spending isn't necessarily, that amount, maybe 80% of, 90% of. So we're trying to show you here is I don't know that we need the budget to be in line with where we were for 24. In multiple places, you'll see it as a slight reduction to where we were in 24. I just didn't want you to be caught off guard. There are increases in here for things, and we'll talk about those pieces, but it's not atypical for some of these lines to come back down a little bit with where we think we'll actually need the budget to be.
So we have good data on actuals, and that's what you reduced it down to? Like I said.
Yeah, this will pull us a little bit more in line. Yeah. So we know that there was a legislative update or increase that'll take effect in 25. That new wage amount is factored in here, so you'll see the increase from 126,627 to 133,614. The line below that then is the pension percentage, a direct calculation, 14% of what the wages are. And then we do project a 10% increase on the insurance, the health insurance piece. We have one person who is on that, and so we do anticipate 10%. That's something you all could sit here and tell me, Tiffany, I don't know if 10% is enough or 10% is too much. We could have that conversation. 10% seems to be like an industry standard for health insurance and what you could expect to see. Other insurance benefits are there, your life visions, those kinds of things, depending on elections, and we have a 2% factored in there. The first budget here, beyond personnel services, is training and services. And we do show a decrease. This is one of those places where there's enough data to show a drop in what we think that budget needs to be. Obviously, this group could push us on that, but we would expect that to come a little bit more in line with where we've been for training and services. Same with legal. We would expect that to come down, a slight reduction based off of where we were this year. And then hold out our supplies and other in line with where where we were for '24. Questions?
John, do you think the legal, since we're now on hourly? The contract change.
I think we have legal spread out through the whole system, so I'd have to see what the $4 amount is. I think hopefully.
Well, you said, I know there's legal in other places, in other funds and whatnot, but with that, where it is sort of related to council, would that primarily be for the solicitor? Okay. And then other things in other places are not solicitor, or nothing to do with it.
Well, they're solicitor, but they're being charged from a different area.
All right, down in Mayor, some changes there. You can see all the same things we talked about, updated amounts, percentage of wage in line, and then this other budget would consume the mayor's other budget line items, and that to be in line with where we were for '24 from a budget perspective. Am I going too slowly? Do you want to see me pick it up, or I'm trying to gauge what all you're used to seeing, what you want to see, give you time to talk, so.
I personally like the rate at which we're going.
Okay.
And, you know, when folks have questions on a particular item, I expect them to be able to drill down or just
Yep.
discuss certain things. Anybody else have any other different feelings? Hearing none, that motion is failed.
Okay. Administration. We have the line item here, and there is a big drop from administrative services perspective that puts us a little bit more in line, slightly higher than where we were in '22 and '23, but a serious reduction from where we were in '24. We'll get to that because there are some notable things that you'll probably shake your head at and say, yes, that makes sense. Wages are in line with where we'd expect them to be with adjustments made. Obviously, the 14, 10, and 2% respectively here are reflected in administrative services, or excuse me, in personnel costs. Then we have the retainer for Rita. We expect that to actually increase a little bit for next year, and that's one of those pieces that we'd like to have a budget allocation set there. Obviously, if we don't need it, we won't use that, but we think that there's going to be a need, given where it has been, to increase that allocation. Legal, here's another place where I think we're still in line. We're slightly higher with where we've been over the last couple of years, just a $765 reduction, but very much in line. The big reduction from an administrative perspective is here in this services and training. In 374,000 last year. We had 245 of that wrapped up in, I believe it's 2 professional service contracts. We had the strategic plan and the employment search that, with Johnny and Michelle, they don't see a need to budget for those 2 things this year, so that's the big reduction from 24 to 25, almost entirely captures the large reduction from the budget from an administrative allocation perspective. Auditors deductions, these happen to us, and they're in line with where we've been, slightly elevated as a result of what's happening from an audit perspective to $45,000. Rental property, there's the property tax on the property, and there is a reduction here. There was a contract of $65,000. That was the Walnut Street renovations that we expect that budget essentially to be done and not needed for any other projects in 25 like in kind. So again, another budget reduction from a rental property perspective. Library capital, it's actually the library budget and capital for the library. We had initially planned on an ADA door in the library being installed in calendar year 24. We don't see that happening in 24. We've kicked that $10,000 budget allocation to 25. So when you look at that 10.5 allocation for 24, it was 20. We kicked the 10,000 to this year, and so you're seeing that adjustment on the books. Loss in place, like Michelle had said to start, that got shifted to affordable housing effectively fully in 24. And so we'll go over loss in place in a little bit. Cable TV is in line. There actually is still quite a bit happening with cable TV. We have the subsequent services for that. Council commissions, we did an accounting shift, and Michelle, I'm going to probably defer to you on this shift. But we had done council commissions, and this included sponsored events and council commission initiatives, and we're shifting that.
So in the past, what we would do is any of the police officers, street department, electric, any of our staff that worked overtime for the events, we would do a transfer from council commissions to that line item. So say to police or to the streets department to cover those overtime wages. So what we would like to do going forward in '25 is just budget that money that we would have transferred, budget it into that line item and make a new line saying in public safety, special events OT, and in electric, special events OT. That way we can track that better to know how much is being charged for the year.
And not have to do the transfer.
And not to do the transfers. So we'll still have the initiatives, you'll still see it. When we get to public safety, in fact, you can see it, it's right there, row 99, right here. This is that piece. This is the public safety part of what used to be council commissions transfer. We added a line here, called it sponsored events. It's actually overtime wages for our safety department, and we pulled that allocation. So it's not as, it shows on row 95 as a budget reduction. It's not, it's just a shift in how we're handling the funds. And we'll pull it in. This is just a piece of that shift. Okay. Any questions on that before okay. Public safety, we have the wages built in here. This is obviously what we just talked about, that sponsored events piece. And we do have a change additionally in pension calculations, not the calculations themselves, but how we account for them. It shows on paper here like it's a large increase in pension. There is no change in the percentage from the police pension fund calculation. But we do get a small tax collection in our police pension fund. It does not cover all of our police pension. And so what we used to do is we used to transfer money from the general fund to the police pension fund and on an estimate and spend all pension or most of pension, not all of pension because we still had some in the general fund, but we would spend the lion's share of our pension from the police pension fund. Change in accounting, making it more simple. We're going to spend out of the police pension fund whatever our tax collection is, whatever our net received in our police pension fund is. The rest of it will be paid out of the general fund for this. So it's just a difference of a fund that either we could transfer the money from the general fund to the police pension fund, or we could just expend it, or we could spend it out of the general fund. It's just an easier accounting to just spend it out of the general fund. So it looks again like an increase here. It's not, if you looked at both funds together, it's still the same percentage calculation. Looked at a lot of things to try to make sure that when we were transferring money, it made sense to transfer money, and that's where some of these things, you're like, wait a minute. Just because we've always done it that way, it doesn't necessarily make sense that operations is that the most efficient, nor does it necessarily line up with the intent. So we did a lot of digging and soul searching to figure out what really made sense operationally. And so, again, that's just another one of those pieces. All right, then after that you see the health line, that's a 10% increase. Other benefits is a 2% increase. Services and training are in line reasonably with where the service and training funds have been. It's a slight increase, but there is a hardware maintenance, a hardware software maintenance for multi-factor. I don't know what that is.
It's a two-step multi-factor that Paige needs downstairs.
To be compliant.
To be compliant, and then it also includes, it's the annual maintenance, the startup, I forget the exact dollar amount, but it'll go down for the renewal, and then she also needs the computer for that as well.
So you'll see there's, the supplies and materials are slightly elevated. That will give her a little bit of flexibility to do computer. And then capital, there's a couple different initiatives identified. Tough Books leads, Digital Ally and Tasers are wrapped in that 84,925. allocation for public safety.
Did you get a case card in there?
It should be covered with the payment we've made. It should be.
But it was an annual,
I believe it's in the annual rate. Yeah.
and then you hit, Mike, did you hit my budget for
I don't
somebody?
think we did.
Because you can't.
Okay.
Planning and zoning, I'm going to keep going, sorry.
No.
Okay, good. Planning and zoning is the next subcategory. We are expecting an increase here for planning and zoning. Primarily, you'll see the green calling out the added 1 FTE for a zoning office and economic development staff member. And so you'll see that increase is there. It then has a net impact or a direct impact on our pension calculation, 14%. And then we also had to add benefits for the new staff member. And so you'll see a small allocation for benefits there, and then otherwise a 10% increase for benefits.
What's permit services?
Down here, this is for all the permitting. This is where, this is the direct result of the permits.
Is that revenue?
No, it's the expense.
This is the expense side.
Oh, it's for NIC.
Yeah.
It's okay.
These, when I spoke of revenue, though, these are the 2 line items that when our expenses increase, those are the 2, these are the 2 line items where our expenses increase for 24, 25, and then they'll drop back down, at least we expect them to in 26. You'll see a little bit of an increase in services and training for the new employee to make sure there's room for training. You'll also see down here in other, we have an added computer station that will be required for that new employee. And so that budget allocation is a little higher than what it had been trended to allow for that new employee to onboard and have functionality. Mediation, you'll see, is in line with where we've been, and so 14,000. And then this is the lion's share of the rest of the general fund. These are transfers that we expect to happen to each of the respective funds. And so we would expect, as of today, to send a general fund transfer of $219,000 to the streets fund, $700,000 to parks, affordable housing, notwithstanding any changes, $175,000, and then to facilities capital, $50,000. And we'll dive in a little bit more.
When you say transfer, what does that mean? Like from the revenue received throughout the year, we transfer it to?
So we do by ordinance. We have to move, anytime you're going to move money from one fund, in this instance it's our general fund, to any other fund, by law you have to call that a transfer, which your elected officials have to approve. We do that in an ordinance. I think they either just did one, or I know we reworked that ordinance. But anyway, they have to formally make that move, and the way they do that is by a transfer. And the reason we have to do that, and this is not atypical, is because the majority of our revenue streams are coming into the general fund. We don't have sufficient revenue streams in our other funds.
So it compensates, right?
Yes. And that's a typical of most local governments, that there's some level of supplementation that comes from the general fund. Not always, but it's not atypical to see. All right, Johnny and Michelle, anything I missed, anything you want to?
Oh, well, I think so.
Okay.
You go.
Questions?
Advances, was that something we talked about earlier?
This was, this is the $545,000 that we sent out this year. And that then we expect to come back. I'm going to scroll up here, so sorry with your eyes. That's the revenue right here that we expect to collect. This is what I tell you is like our official revenue. It was money we just moved from, a different source back in. So it's reflected there. So I think at the end of the day, the one thing I want to show you is that this line tells us if we're balanced or if we're a deficit spending. And I started and I told you that we are projected right now to be balanced. We do have a $25,000 reserve built in. That's just for budget shortfalls, anything that just gives us a little bit more flexibility by account line. But at the end of the day, if you take out that $545,000 of artificial revenue that I've talked about, we are still balanced to the tune of $159. But we do and are presenting today a balanced budget.
Yay.
So I will also tell you, this current year that we're in, although we show a $607,000 deficit, the lion's share of that is that $545,000 going out. And so we are more in line to budget to be balanced than not. That ends our cash balance then at $3.7 million. I could show you, I could unhide, unless you all want me to bore you with the rest of this, I could show you, we have this trended out for the next 10 years. But we can get into that later too.
On sponsored events, so we have the 19,000 booked for public safety. Where is there a number under administration for public works?
Yeah, it's under the streets, and it's
Yeah.
another 19,000.
Okay, 19,000 under
There's
streets.
a transfer.
Yeah,
We just took the,
that's right.
split it in half.
Yeah.
Right. And then,
So the electric and water guys will actually write it in as a streets.
gotcha. Okay.
Versus trying to put it in multiple funds, they just know that it's streets.
Cool, thanks.
Yep, I jumped there, so for those of you who have it in your packet, it's that third page of budgets, orangish color, and here's that $19,000 that we're breaking out that sponsored events. All right, the revenue on streets fund is very simple, so I'm gonna dive in there unless you all stop me, I'll just keep going. So our street maintenance fund is Fund 202. We have two other funds that also have revenue streams and subsequent expenses as permissive, which is 208, and state highway, which is 203. But for the street maintenance fund, we three primary sources, notwithstanding general fund transfers. We have the gas tax, the motor vehicle, and a really small amount of other. Our projections are very much in line with where we have been and expect to be this year. The transfers, right now we have a $219,000 transfer in. 19,000 of that, you see the note here, is to cover the special events. There's not special, sponsored events. Sorry, I should change that. Sponsored events that we just talked about for the overtime of wages. I'll change that. Permissive tax very much in line with where we've been, trending just a very small 1% increase. In state highway, very much in line, again, just a 1% increase planned there with those two other funds. We lump all of that together in its street-related revenue, and we expect to collect slightly less than we did last year, only because we last year did a trend this year. I say last year, like we're in 2025, but we had done a $300,000 plan on a $300,000 transfer here. This year, we're looking at 219. Rolling down to street fund wages, you'll see those are slightly less than where we were last year. It's not a reduction of people, it's just pulling people in line and then shifting them as the sponsored events. Again, I'll get that verbiage right on here. Sorry, making myself move. And then 14%, the 10%, and the 2% for those personnel expenses. The professional services line, we had dropped in '24 with a slight now increase for Blacktop to be more in line with where we have been. And I know, Yanni, you can probably speak to that way better than me, but we had dropped the budget in '24 and again are looking to add a little bit more Blacktop services to the budget this upcoming year. Other services in training, these are two reductions from prior years. This is just a conscious budget reduction to reduce costs and to bring those budget allocations in line with what we think makes a healthy budget available to our street department. And then we do have some capital identified. We've got sidewalks, curbs, signage, and spoils. I could show you $52,000 of sidewalk, crack seal and striping, $10,000. Curbing is $41,600. Corporation signs, $31,20.
What are spoils?
All the dig outs that's put don't, or at the farm, we have to haul up at the end of the year.
Gotcha.
Mild budgets that line up with state highway, those funds are restricted to state highway surfaces and permissive tax. Just a small allocation there to keep in line if there's any small project that is qualifying with those permissive tax funds. And then another just small $10,000 reserve for budget shortfalls. As we look to reduce budgets over here to make them in line with where we think they want to be, we want to give ourselves a little bit of flexibility, not necessarily put the allocation in the budget, in the system, but if we need it, to be able to come back and boost where we were short. At the end of the day, that puts us, our street fund, at just under $100,000. We are planning on a deficit spend in the street fund, about $300,000. Lines up with where we were last year as well. That fund, we could very easily balance. It just would be at the risk of an unbalanced general fund budget. I think that's the extent of the budget diagram, right? And then we're going to do,
How do we have the parks?
parks. Okay. Revenue for the Parks Fund is very simple. We have a little bit of pool admissions, which one, I will tell you, it's down a little bit this year from where it was. Those numbers are reduced from what we had initially planned. And so we reduced to what we expect our revenue to be. Other revenue sources, small amount, but in line with where we would expect or saw them this current year. The big change here is the transfer from the general fund. We know in order to make our Parks and Rec fund whole, it'll take a little bit larger transfer from the general fund than we've done the last couple of years. Our wages will be in line. The plan is to be in line wages from where we have been. Again, pension is 14%, a 10% increase then in health insurance. There is an increase here because I believe there is more than 10%.
There's an employee that
Yes.
might be switching.
Yes, there's an employee who we're aware of maybe shifting from timesheet to eligible for benefits, and we have to increase our benefit allocation accordingly. Services and training, this is another place we look to do some budget reductions to put in line with operations, tighten the belt, so to speak. And then a reduction in materials and supplies because we qualified for that bench grant in '24 that we don't anticipate collection or to have that expense in '25. Pool wages very much in line, pension and other benefits in line, services and training very much in line, materials and supplies you'll see a small reduction. And then we have some capital initiatives identified, but we had started a while ago to shift the capital initiatives to the capital fund for Parks and Rec. And so we have those shown on a different page. Bryan Center then, we have an increase here. This is a staff member that we think, an hourly staff that we think we're going to need a little bit more of that person's time. And so that's allocated here accordingly. The 14% off of that, and then the 10% increase for benefits. Again, the hourly staff could push the person eligible for benefits. And so there is an increased allocation for that as well. We have maintenance of equipment and facilities. There is an allocation of $60,000. We had a project, John, I know I find up the note. Gym lighting, elevator, pickleball, and striping project in '24. We don't anticipate needing quite that allocation for some of our maintenance of equipment and facilities as we did in '24. So more in line with where we were '22 and '23. Other services, again, budget redirection, trying to drop that and manage with a little smaller budget. Same thing with the Bryan Youth Program, trying to bring some of those allocations and budgets back down in line. It does call for, if we're going to do some of the capital initiatives identified in the capital, that we would have to transfer from the Parks and Rec Fund to then the capital fund.
So it goes from the general fund to the Parks and Rec to the capital.
Yeah.
I know, it's so complicated.
You can, yeah, and so there are requirements in how the money does flow, and you have to send it to be able to send it to.
Wow.
Just count.
Is the 200,000 mostly pool?
No. 85,000 is for parks, and I've reduced the pool to 62,700.
Okay.
So
And the other 50,000?
it's still parks, it's not enough to achieve.
Okay. And anything major in the parks piece? No.
Get ready to flip, I can flip there around if that helps you.
Softball, baseball dugouts, the fencing, reworked the stone wall. That's only covering half the cost. Playground equipment. And there's, I believe there's another to replace in that. Pool, I've actually reduced the pool quite a bit because I had $225,000 for concrete repairs needed around basically the entire pool. Instead, we're going to try to eat it off one bite at a time, and I've reduced it to $20,000 per year just for concrete repair. I got to get the pool painted. It's passed it 2 times, so it's got to be painted this year. The diving boards have got to be replaced at a tune of $10,000 for 2 diving boards. They are past the expiration. So the big thing is I'm trying to do it this year is to reduce with some of the cost. I have a motor that's going to be pulled out to one that we rebuilt. It's already been 4 years. It's $9,000 to rebuild that one. So, and that's, here is Samantha's list that I went down through, and that's a full page. We've tried to get all the RDMs that we could off of the list. Freezer went out at the end of the last season, so we're trying to see if we have enough funds to be able to secure for this year. If not, there will be a added cost.
The commercial freezer?
Correct. And we're working with Don Beard to see if we can get a better price because he buys so much freezer stuff.
Tiffany, can we go back to the very first thing you showed us?
On this page or?
No, like, yeah, very at the beginning, summer.
Yep.
And, okay, so just in terms of how the general fund starts to not look so great after after this year,
Yeah.
is that just because that hasn't all been worked out yet, or?
So there's a host of reasons, and I will tell you, the revenue sources that we see other than the income tax are pretty stable.
Yeah.
And they don't grow at the same rate. Income tax has a little bit of vulnerability to it, but it has a little bit more of an anticipated increase. And so our revenue sources, though, otherwise are pretty generally flat when we have built-in increases for wages and benefits and those kinds of things that just outrun the increases of your revenue sources. And so there's that. The other piece I will tell you, and I mean this more from a complementary fashion, we have baked in capital plans, capital initiatives. So facility improvements, infrastructure needs to all of our respective funds. And when I say a complementary, it is very atypical that I go into an organization, talk budgets, and somebody can hand me a stack of capital initiatives that are spanning multiple years and say, here's here are all the capital needs that we have. They may not be bucketed in the exact year that they need to happen, but we've identified when we need to do the big things. And so we have that, and we've baked in some of those capital initiatives. And so one of the things that we've worked, and I will tell you, Johnny has worked really hard on, is smoothing out what those needs are for next year, for year 25. And those same kind of budget manipulations and like finessing the budget will happen in 26 and 27 and 28. And some of those things that we have planned in 26 are going to get kicked to 27. Likewise, 27 will get kicked to 28. But we have them identified financially and by project in the plan. Probably more aggressively than they're going to actually happen. And so that's also a piece.
Well, not probably, because we wouldn't have the money.
I mean, we would for sure have to have conversations about how to afford those things, but but they are built in not to the fullest level. I mean, Johnny has looked and he has cut and he is, but the initiatives, you know, are in here from a capital perspective.
Gotcha.
Well, just on the streets, special revenue, I'm actually looking at for the next 10 years, we have 2.75 million in capital projects on this list. If you go to pool for the next 10 years, almost 600,000, and the parks is almost 2 million. So we've been kicking the can down the road a long time, and we keep kicking it, taking small bites at a time.
So we don't have that, and we can't go to it. You know that, right? Like the pools thing. So when should we have that conversation? Like when do we talk about capital expenses? Because I mean, those numbers are obviously really big, right? The last number I can see is almost 7 million in the hole, which is a significant change. So there's, I guess I'm just wondering when. I mean, you want to talk about it, right? Like we should.
Yeah, I mean, yes, and we have shared that. It's the same as last year, we just keep adding years on to it. But I can print them all off and send them to everybody to look at.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, like, is there, I don't, maybe it doesn't make sense to do in this budget process, but at some point, it feels like we should have an actual like, capital planning conversation, right? I mean, those are by far the biggest drivers of
Correct.
the future.
Right.
And that's the way it is on all the funds, including PD, including electric, water, sewer, rental properties, electric capital. But yes, I can send them to you guys if you want to look at it.
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to see them, but more so, I'd like to have like a full conversation about it so we can talk through and see like what's the, like I don't, this, you know, the thing you just said about we've been kicking the can on the pool, like I didn't know that. You know, it would be helpful to know what other things have we kicked. As a newer person, maybe other people are aware of these, you know, the things that are on that radar, but that wasn't one that was on my radar as an example.
The electric, I'll just give you a shocker number. The electric for 10 years is $7,389,391.06. And some of this is, we have notes in there for ourselves, it's a $750,000. If we was to get a grant, that would be the match for the FEMA grant. So it's an ongoing, it's creative. Dan's actually been working on it yet today, on what we feel is the RDN of those, and then the rest of it we just kind of keep.
Does that include rec sales?
It does not include rec sales. Well, we do have rec sales baked in there at half of what we think or what we have gotten. We don't want to over anticipate. But what we've done now is with the rec sales, we've actually taken, we don't have to use some of the money, so we're using the rec sale money. So we're making grounds, but we're also not just stopping at 10 years. We're actually daily and weekly changing this because something else comes up. Somebody else is wanting to go something new. Somebody's wanting to do something. So it's an ongoing.
So we'll see is the next one, we do the other funds?
Yes.
Okay. And these all already include the changes with the rate increases, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, so it's a great segue. I'll show you kind of what's driving. So we have this assumptions page. We don't know what's going to happen with our property values, but we have to make an assumption. And so you'll see what assumptions we've made. And so we think in 27, reappraisal will be another 20% increase. We could be absolutely wrong. We know that is stuck in legislative land right now with revisions and proposed changes. And so that number could be grossly wrong. If it were today, the increase would be higher than that. Yet again, sales and values are holding in line with where they are. But then, so your valuation amounts change, what your tax collection rate, what your income tax collection increases are. We have 2.5% baked in. For these are revenue sources, but we have these consumer fees that we know or we anticipate to have. So your electric consumer fee increases. Your pool admissions, we're not anticipating any increases. Your water consumer fees, sewer, storm, solid waste, any of the consumer fees where we know they're likely going to be increases, we baked those in. Consequently, then on the other side, they also come with expenses or contracts, that we're going to have to pay, and you'll see those baked in on the expense side. But then all the wages, if you all said, Tiffany, we don't want you to plan on a 10% medical increase, okay, I could change this number, and it would change on your respective budget line items for medical increases and dental increases. If we're adding staffing, we can do that. But then, just general cost of living increases for staff, we have to plan on something, and so we plan those here. Those are going to be higher rates of increase. All of these pieces for the years, notwithstanding that first year, where we don't necessarily have revenue sources going at the same increase. Right, and that's what pushes those numbers to look not as healthy 5 to 10 years out.
Well, it just reaffirms why we need a strategic plan, that coincides with all of this, with all of the departments involved. We need to get that done.
And the other piece that bears strong mentioning is we do have a renewal levy that will have to be renewed if we want it to be renewed, and its collection is about $840,000 of our revenue source in the general fund. So when you look at our total revenue at around $5 million, 840,000 of that is that levy that we need to decide what to do with.
So just so we don't lose this, and if other people don't think we should talk about the capital, obviously speak up. I guess I'm wondering, when would be the right time to talk about it? Should we make a note to just try to have a conversation? I'm just imagining maybe it's a work session or something, first half of next year.
Or I can individually meet with you guys involved with that.
I don't know what you're saying.
I'm just saying right now, just a word, something to talk about our capital expenses. Right now, we're not talking about capital expenses.
So is that not folded in the strategic plan? Yeah, it should be during the strategic planning process.
Yeah, that's probably that good holding place, or a potential holding place for. It's going to happen within arm's reach of time, late this year, early next year. Is there any capital issues pending or in danger of getting lost in the next few months? So would that be a good? That's a good time to fully land with the strategic planning discussion.
Well, you're supposed to, because you work with a lot of local governments, and ours is unusual in its level of participation. Okay. So what's typical? To me, typically a local government would say, well, here are our projections, we have these things, we need this much infrastructure upkeep for this amount of time, this needs replacing, blah, 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 blah. That's just baked into what you do. what do you see as a reasonable approach in terms of?
So there's all different types of answers to that question. I would tell you, I would say that generally there's a little bit more, there's a gross scrutiny that comes for the upcoming year's capital initiatives that happens about this time, right? And so that's why you'll see a lot of those initiatives we baked here, and we went through some of those. But then years 2 and 3 are also discussed at a level of, these are the things on the horizon, right? And they could shift, could be pulled a little bit sooner or pushed a little bit later, but generally at a higher level, a little less gross scrutiny, as these are the things we are aware of that have some level of imminence to them. But I don't know that it begs a huge conversation of 10 years in capital just because so much can change. You know, what we've got baked in at year 8 could very well be year 12, you know, by the time we're there. So just knowing that there's a figure on the pulse, which is why I'm telling you I was really genuinely impressed with the level of detail that I got, because that is atypical. Usually if I have current year awareness of what the capital initiatives are, we're on good ground. Here I was able to say, okay, not only do I know what's being proposed for next year, but I know the year after, and the year after, and the year after, and maybe not at the level that it's going to happen, but at least somebody is taking and doing assessments on your facilities and on your equipment to know what are some of the things, what other shoe could come down. And so I was hugely pleased to see that. But back to your question, I would say gross scrutiny usually happens around this time for the upcoming year's capital initiatives with an general overview of years 2 and 3.
So then, really I misspoke. So it's not really a strategic planning issue. Because
Yeah, I would say like the strategic planning can help guide us at this point when we're trying to prioritize what projects, capital projects, we need to push off to later years. We could use a strategic plan to kind of evaluate what our priorities are through that lens and be like, okay, we'll push that off because that's not in our strategic plan or whatever. I think like a capital planning document like this is a separate effort typically. And we create like a capital facilities plan for the organization for the village as a separate document. They could be run together, but I think we could always go back, Johnny and Lisa and I've done these efforts before with different other organizations. So we could, like she said, it's very different. It's kind of what your needs are, what your elected officials want, where you're at financially, where you're at with administratively, staff-wise, what capacity we have to do those kind of efforts. So I think we could go back and talk about it and come up with a time frame. I think it's reasonable to have for the council to have an idea of generally what capital projects Johnny's talking about in this, because I think it's great that he's still on top of it, but it's nice to share that information so we at least know what's on the horizon, they know what's on the horizon, at least in his mind, and we can help put that together.
So I think that's really what you're getting at, right? Karen, you want to get into the 10-year capital.
Yeah, I'm just talking about like, you know, you're saying we have $7 million over the next 10 years, but so when are we starting to set aside the money for it? You know, that's all. Let's just talk about it a little bit. And the other thing is that I think everybody feels great about, you know, we've got the documents, we've got somebody who's paying attention to it. But as I understand it, if you took the last 30 years, the vast majority of it, we didn't do this. So it's just building in some. No, that's the way it was always been explained to me.
That we did not do the capital.
Right.
Absolutely correct.
5 years worth, that's typical though. Now, was it realistic?
Okay. There are people who will complain about, and Johnny was the primary one for most of the time I've been here, so I think we're on the same page. So anyway, just all I'm saying is I think it's healthy to have some kind of systematic discourse around, hey, what are our capital expenses, so that we're not getting into a situation where we've got this big thing that, and by making it more transparent, it just makes it less likely we're going to have some big number that's built. That's all. It's like we're talking about, if it's well done, it's like it takes, I don't know, an hour or two once a year. We do a check-in on capital.
Well, we can figure it out if we want to do it as part of the strategic planning effort, or we want to do it
I think
separate.
it's completely different from strategic planning. Strategic plan is where we're moving forward. Capital is for all the expenses that we know is coming up, and the plans beyond the strategic planning, the backbones. That's what it is. If you, Gavin, I hear what you're saying in biopharma. I think it's really probably just an individual meeting with everybody versus trying to sit in a room and explain, because I don't want to be the one trying to explain everything to you. I would prefer to have my department heads explain the reasoning for the PFAS and the engineering and things like that. I can give you the best overview. But in order to have the experts in the room like Brad, Ben, Tanner, Samantha for the pool, that gives me a cushion so you're not just hearing from me saying, oh yes, we got to have it. That way you're also connecting with the staff and they're saying, these are the laws coming up. Like the lead line, you guys remember we talked about the lead line survey. We went after multiple grants, but we couldn't wait for a grant to come in. So then Ben and Rose and Travis and Adam Williams and Lucas Valley decided, hey, we're not waiting. We're going to start this process. And it's a good thing we did. We submitted it last week, 2 days early. And that is more things that we put on our staff. To where if we had it for capital budget, heck, we could have hired it out. But we're trying to think strategically as well. What we learned a lot about our system doing that lead line inventory, and we touched every service in town so we know what it is. So to be able, and if you go into streets, if you click on one of the lines in there, I think you've actually got sidewalks, curbs. If you click on that, that is straight off of this sheet for capital. But I can send the documents and then, or we can schedule a meeting, because I really think it's great to hear. We had it in 2018, Gavin, when I first took over as Public Works Director, we actually had staff come in to give this presentation. And after 2 hours, some council members got tired and they wanted to stop the conversation. So I would, if we're going to do it, we're going to have to break it up into chunks because there's too much to talk about on just one subject. So I would be happy to set maybe a work session where we have electric come in one day and we do an hour and 30 minutes work session, and then we have streets and parks, and I think it's great to be able to listen to somebody other than me.
I think that's great, but what that reminds me of is whatever year we were doing it, last year or this year, I can't remember, but we had your direct reports, the department heads coming in.
And you'll see that
and giving us, updates. Now, it sounds like this would be a much deeper dive
Oh,
on
yes.
the stuff we've seen, but anyway, that's sort of a different way to maybe do a high overview during a council meeting.
Correct.
But if you want to have work sessions to do this, I think the good news is, for everybody, according to Judy's question, what's typical is that we are atypical. And we are doing better than a lot of folks. So there's that.
I also say this, and then I don't want to get off on tangent. I also say prior to the quarterly meetings, man, it'd be great if you guys would get in a truck and ride with the staff. So when you see, when they're talking about something, you recognize what they're talking about. You know what I'm saying? Switch station, water plant, the wastewater treatment facility, the lift station. That way you can put this information, it clicks when you see it.
Absolutely. It does make a big difference.
I've been talking about Bernard Jerry Sims.
You ain't even close.
So,
That's good.
so it sounds like, yeah, if you don't mind sending the documents you have, that would be a good starting point, and then, yeah, I'm up for, I don't think I ever got tired of listening, so.
Sure. Let's get those other three. I didn't either. Whoever else there.
That person's no longer on.
I guess, yeah, that sounds great, John. I mean, and we could break it up into special reports conceivably, or, just or short sessions before council meetings, so that it's not, if it's, anyway. The other thing that would be helpful, just in that context, as you're starting to think about it and talk to the team about it, is having some sense of like how to sort of qualitatively understand what we're aiming for. So take like the electric systems. When I hear you say RDN, I'm assuming it's like, if we don't do this, there's a problem. Yeah? And so I'm, I guess, trying to figure out, like, is this getting us to the point where, let's use a street, for example, where there's no potholes ever? Or is this getting us to, like, yeah, we have a pothole, one, we know that it's going to be a while, like there's a big difference between driving on Indiana's highways and driving on Ohio's highways. So I don't know what that'll look like, but just over time, because there is sort of a question here of like, what is the quality level that we're aiming for, and therefore, what's the level of expense?
So in the past, have you had village managers? Like you said, you've been doing this for 5 years, the CFP?
Since electric since 2014. All of them since 2018.
Okay, so then has the village manager made recommendations to the council on prioritizing?
It's always come from me on the budget for capital for,
But somebody has, like it's not.
yes, it's
us.
always, it's been,
Right.
normally we put it in a budget and then we say we can afford it, we can't afford it. And sometimes it gets taken out. To go back to your point, prior to 19, we always put money into capital from 2015 to 2019-ish. We put money intentionally into capital to build that fund. In 2019, the last year it was not kept up. But we are talking with Tiffany on how to keep that fund.
And just to be clear, for this one, we're not right now.
As of right now, not in the streets, no.
Okay. So that one, you were just talking about streets over the last year. Is that the same for the other?
On the other one, we haven't got to that point, we're still working on that.
Okay.
But with the electric, it's intentional, we have stuff going in there every other week.
Okay.
Next.
Next, I think we're to, next item. I think it's the
Council's specific budgets. So the events. So we're going to move to the council specific budget, events, commissions, special projects. I know we've got a couple requests. I don't know, are there any others?
one follow directions.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good on you, man. Yeah, right. Go over. Doing okay.
The other one would be put in this.
What did you say? Oh.
I have a stupid question, I'm sure you guys probably get used to that. So, the council, I do, I know, I'm always asking this. The council specific, is that for the actual council budget that you just presented and the council commission's budget, or is that additional?
So it's the council specific budget, we're going to go over this, is it coming from this?
So there is nothing baked in, so there's nothing baked in for specific projects, initiatives.
We were asking for those.
Okay, so what's being presented does not include any special initiatives or projects or budget requests. And we've done those last year on our, there's an affordable housing piece where we typically make those allocations. So I think that's where we are, right, trying to figure out what those requests are.
And we have Brian's and we have Emily's, so we just need the other ones. If you want to email them to us or simply want to sit here and debate them all, but if you guys want to send them to us, then we can bake them in that we can show to the next council.
Yeah.
So, the only thing I had a question of that is just, so Johnny, we had talked previously in the housing committee about the idea of hiring a person focused on housing. So is that still something you're thinking about at all?
It is.
Okay,
It's a modification of how it's going to.
okay.
I think you'll like the plan.
Are we allowed to ask questions too?
No, I don't think we're even at that point. It's council. So we asked was, put your request in, put it on the table so that then Michelle takes it, comes back to budget session number 2 and says, all right, well, this is how the numbers start looking. Once we drop these things in, then it becomes a council conversation. Are we okay with that request? Is it something strategically that makes sense? How about half that amount? How about twice that amount? I mean, whatever those discussions are, it happens at the next meeting, because these guys can sort of manipulate the budget just to let you know, well, this is how it's going to start looking. If you do everything that you requested, some of it, you can, and then in real time, as you discuss amongst yourself, they can also say, okay, well, here's the effect that it has if you do this instead of that.
I just have it's just a clarification question. Are we allowed to talk? I don't know.
Not a care in the world.
Okay. Yeah, John, I was wondering, Johnny, if you could just break down for us so everybody has the same information what the $175,000 is that's in affordable housing.
That is strictly loss of place. That's every $175,000 is for the mortgage payments, the electric bill, the gas bill. That is 100% loss of place. Taxes.
Okay, so I'm just making sure I understand what's happening. So the only other requests are the one that Brian, that we got in front of us today from Brian. Right?
And
And the emails from the folks that are here.
Right,
Okay.
so,
So those are the things, so you're saying that this meeting, now these things are going to go into the version, and then next meeting we'll talk about them, right? So we're not talking about this right now?
well, correct, except you guys can do this how you wish, and I say that and move it to the next meeting. But I think it's typical that if I sit next, come to you and say, I would like to ask for $200,000 for this project, I need one of you guys to sponsor that. I need one of you guys to say, then I'm going to make that request in this budget because I think that it fits what I want to see happen, and here's how I see that fitting into the budget. Because otherwise, when that request comes up next meeting, everyone's going to sit there going, well, I don't know, sort of sounds, what do you think? Instead of having a person who says, I'm willing to take that on and promote that as being part of the budget. If none of you are, then it just goes away. But it's not a recommendation coming from staff. It's not something staff says, that'll keep the lights on, the water flowing, streets paved. So somebody's got to kind of take up the thought, I think. Otherwise, the conversations are not very directed. It helps if someone's running point.
That budget, like Judy just said, that budget keeps everybody paid, keeps us moving forward, and keeps the capital that we have for streets and parks and pool function for next year. So that is and then all the other requests, we would go back, we would put that in, that will show you what the end number is going to be, and then that's where the conversation is going to start.
Then there's a flip side of it too. So if let's say, and I'm making this up, but if Brian's recommending a certain amount come for housing, and Gavin is saying, I was advocating for someone who would be able to be on staff doing more with housing. Those two things dovetail because this request may not be able to happen function without an increase in staff budget, et cetera. So, you know what I mean? So then we're sort of able to put those pieces together and say, that looks like a total request of about X, but it makes it happen, and it makes it functional, and it doesn't overburden staff and lead to a probable failure of that initiative because it's just not been spec'd out far enough.
I have another clarification question, if that's okay. So I know when we came with our request from the 2025 budget in July, council did, my understanding, Judy, and please correct me, that council agreed to consider it formally during the budget process. That was the decision that was made. And so do we also then need to talk with individual council members to find a sponsor for our request to be considered, or is it already going to be considered?
No, I don't think that's your job to do. They don't.
No, but what I'm saying is it already in queue to be considered, or does it need a champion?
It's already here.
Okay, thank you.
So that can be something y'all decide in the next couple of days. I can shoot out an email and go, all right, these are the requests we've got. Any takers? Means you might have to do some legwork on ancillary costs. But does that work for you guys?
Yeah, I've got a couple of ideas, but I haven't done the legwork yet. I just texted you.
All right, I'm assuming you're sponsoring your requests.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of them are covered, as I mentioned, based on what I've read or whatever, so.
So, I guess we do have a question about economic development and the support that we did give YSDC in that regard, and is that money still available?
It's probably coming back.
So, are we at the juncture where what we said was we would anticipate supporting that for a year, and that's looking at for the year was cut short, and whenever the year ended, we would consider bringing it in-house.
So now
getting there
we're to that point.
quicker than we anticipated.
Correct.
Okay. Should we take a break since we barely had quorum now?
Thank you, Brian. We just realized you're the only one who followed the directions. So we're going to go back. You followed the initiative.
That's right.
That's what Brian was sitting in there now early.
Yeah, I need a gold star.
Well, there's a lot in here, right? There's 4. So it's basically you have 4 different requests, basically.
Yeah, well, I can just briefly highlight, starting with economic development. You know, I was just thinking again, like, depending on what we decide, but I like the plan that's modeled here to have a person in-house. Then I think it's just a matter of like thinking about that 40,000 that we committed last year that goes into that mix, and we're talking about a number that's about 70,000 for 2025. So. I would just, and hopping up to active transportation, I think that's pretty well covered in this budget. Johnny, the one thing I didn't see in that list was speed bumps, so I guess I'm just wondering.
10 professional services.
Okay, all right. And then the only other thing is that are we contemplating implementing any of the things that we get back, you know, related to recommendations for traffic calming? So is that kind of in this budget or not really?
I think it's going to be a long process. I think we could still have some funds available. We could probably do it all. Some of them, Brian, could be somewhat paint. Some of them could be static. Some of them could be put out temporary speed bumps. We have 6 actively temporary speed bumps, but we're hoping to regain. We're talking about putting some permanent ones on there.
Right. And then it didn't seem like there was much in for signage, so, I mean, if we want more flashy signs, is that just, we don't
I'm
really?
trying to take them slow because I don't want to all of a sudden start getting complaints that it's Vegas. You know, they are bright, and we're trying to watch where we're going with
It
it.
changes the vibe. It's like having bright lights. I don't,
You know what though? What we have found is the people that see them bright lights, they are hitting their brakes immediately because it's something new. You know, and they're like, oh my, and then they realize, hey, it's 25. So I said last night, either the bright lights in front of you going to get you, or the bright lights behind you is going to get you. One bright lights is going to get you.
So I think overall, 142,000 looks like a good number to me, especially if on top of that, we're thinking about speed bumps. Correct. So I think that covers, and this, by the way, largely came from the Active Transportation Committee, and Johnny's at those meetings, so we both hear kind of what they want to prioritize. As a side note, we confirmed that Safe Routes to School does not require a match, because we had thought about budgeting that in, because there's going to be a third round. That's going to do East Enon Sidewalk and get us to Mary's Way. That's going to do some other targeted crossings. So and we've had good success on that. All right, so I think we're good there. I'll just say on housing, I think again that part of this is addressed in the planning and zoning budget, because my understanding is that we're thinking about economic development, we're thinking about housing, and then of course we got all the other stuff. What maybe deserves a little more conversation is, besides that person, what else do we need to get Glass Farm off the ground or some of these other projects that I think we want to put in the queue as soon as possible. So we don't have to talk about that right now, but I guess that's what I'm thinking, that maybe beyond what's in planning and zoning and what we have for lots in place, we might consider, but I don't know exactly what that looks like. If we need consulting support or something else, I don't know. Okay. Were you going to say something, Judy? No. Okay. And then I guess the thing on the back of the page is obviously triggered by current conversations. And so I like, for example, that I heard the dugouts are being thought about. Is that for both ball field?
That is not dugout, so that it backstops and fencing.
Okay. I thought I heard you say dugouts.
In the existing budget, yeah.
It's on the fencing and all that.
Yeah. Okay. And backstops, is that related to safety stuff too, or? Okay. So some of the things that I've heard come up, and I guess we're going to hear more in that meeting with the community sports stakeholders, is things like safety and netting and that sort of stuff. I know dugouts have been talked about by some people, and some of the other things that we don't have. There's also things related to, like, could we have a restroom and whatever. And I know so there's a lot of different things. But my thought is that some recommendations may come up, and I think it's at least worth seeing what that does to the budget if we invest more in Don Park in particular than we're contemplating. But we still need some data on what that actually looks like. And I guess since we all know what we're talking about, that could also mean some returfing, if rec soccer fields are going to go there, something like that. Again, none of that decided. But I bring it up for two reasons. One is, in the short term, we're probably going to be talking about if we're willing to make any investments in rec sports. And number two, in the longer term, we might hear some things that we might want to contemplate. But we don't need to process that today. But that's why I put it in there, what I'm thinking.
That makes sense. I would be interested though in first, I mean, of course it's all, we threw it all in the mix, but what I would be interested in first, and I think that that we would get a lot of support of this, with putting more money for the improvements that need to be made to the swimming pool that everybody in the county is the last one. So yes to that, and also we need to prioritize that.
Okay, so hopefully my suggestions don't rock the budget too much. I think the one thing that's kind of not contemplated is that last thing that I just talked about. So.
One thing that I can tell you that is not in the budget, I did not put it in the budget, is the south end bathrooms for downtown. I do like a suggestion that was made, and it could increase the cost just a little bit on that budget. It is porta johns in a different area on the south end of town, just to try it out. And then we're talking about maybe making be on the street, but it will be blocked off by barricades to where they take up a couple parking places, but they're on south. Just to see if that makes sense. I think they will, but
How far south?
probably Short Street.
South end of downtown.
Correct. South. Sorry about that. I had to come believe you. Downtown. Actually explain it in Southview.
That's a nice place. I know you
Well, we know where we can put them. Yeah.
Well, you're all welcome to come use the restroom down the hall.
Sorry, I should have said so.
Yeah, thanks. That brought me.
South end of downtown business.
Okay.
Okay, well, if Brian gets 2 gold stars for following directions, do the rest of us get gold stars if we don't have anything?
Yeah.
Actually,
I think we get more gold stars.
So that means I shouldn't be what I was going to do.
John, can you say anything about, and we talked about this finance, some of the stuff I just asked for transparency, just so we're communicating. So obviously it took some work. You referenced some things to get to bringing a balanced budget. So what's your sense of how is the staff feeling about this version? Is there, in the past, you've obviously been the most vocal person saying, hey, I don't like this budget actually. This is, the village manager brought this thing, but we had a bunch of fights behind the scenes that, you didn't hear about. So in all seriousness, I'm just wondering, so that the other staff here, what we've talked about, and other council members here, we've talked about in Finance Committee, is that what's happened in the past is that then council would bring things, there was this energy of council brings stuff, but staff already gave up on a bunch of dreams, and then here comes, council with these ideas that, why are they promoted? And I think we started last year and tried to sort of have a different mentality that essentially all of these things are considered equal. So that budgets are reflections of our priorities, that all the ideas, so if there are big things that are already on the cutting floor, to name that. So I guess I'm just wondering if you could just talk for a second about how is this version feeling to people? Does this feel like, oh, we feel great, this feels like it gets us where we want to be, or is there a reasonable level of frustration?
I'll just say, and yes, I have been the most vocal, and probably still will be, but I have met with everyone except for Ben on a budget. He's off. He was supposed to actually meet with me this week. We have walked through line item by line item. They have told me where they can decrease. They told me where, hey, we need help here. So I've met with Samantha, I've met with Brad, I've met with Tanner. All of us in the office are feeling good. We're all just speaking out. I mean, that's the best part about it. At the end of the day, we didn't say, oh, this is what we wanted. We all put our heads together and it's like, okay, this is a little over, this is a little under, we can do this, we can do that. Same way with Paige. Paige has given it to Michelle, she's given it to myself, she'd come in and talk to us, hey, we need some here, we need some help here. So overall, I think the staff has been more involved with this budget than any budget, because what happened prior to, I would sit in there with the staff and the finance director, and I said, this is what we gotta have. And then by the time we got to you, it was cut in half, and if not more, and if you remember your first meeting, it was not a great meeting with me. So I think at the end of the day, when we bring it to you and you're like, hey, this is good information. I mean, Tiffany and Michelle and the ladies, we've done a lot of work to get it to this point.
Okay, great, thank you.
Well, for fear of losing my gold stars, the one thing, and this is, Brian, this is great, I really appreciate this. I think I would say some additional things about housing, some more detailed things about housing. And one thing that I did request last year was a moderate amount of funds for municipal broadband, and those were spent, and I think it was helpful to have them. Excuse me, but I quite honestly have lost the thread on municipal broadband and where we are, so that's part of my one reason, other than me being lazy, is why I didn't put together anything, but part of the groundwork or the legwork that I'm talking about is finding out where we are. And I don't know.
Okay, so I can tell you about broadband. We're still losing money. We are taking revenue to pay for the bills because of ongoing issues. We're not in the negative, but the storm, we have repairs from the storm needs because we're not used to seeing broadband laying on the ground or being ripped off buildings. So now we're having doors people come back in and do some of that work. Where we are, we have currently signed pole attachment agreements with Ultra Fiber, and we are in their queue for 2025. As far as people routinely paying their bills, I mean, we're still getting revenue. We're still got the hardware store doing service calls. We got businesses moving in, business moving out. It's still, Community Foundation is still picking up that consumer fee for businesses right now. So we'll turn that corner. But we could use Open Broadband just to be able to keep it going and not having to keep transferring funds and moving funds to and from. You know, they pay the bill, we pay the bill with that. So I think I've got, I hate to say, I think I've probably got about $5,000 or $6,000 in repair bills now. Just so you guys know, just a side note, we had a little over $37,000 worth of tree storm damage just from a contractor help. That's above and beyond what we paid staff. So that storm, Helene, it was huge. But on the side note, in February, we actually got all the checks back from our insurance company, and they did pick up mutual aid costs, the overtime costs, all the things from the Bryan Center that was burned up. So we're replacing those, or what we had replaced already, and the heating system, the AC system, and all that money's been put back into the fund.
Okay. All right, so I will be with you later. Go ahead.
Well, so I was just going to say, before we talk about putting money into municipal broadband, it sounds like we're at that stage where we may need to talk about selling it or having somebody else take it over. So, which was supposed to be one of the next steps. So, but glad to hear about the Alta Fiber.
That was just last week. We had to tweak some things on the pole attachment agreement, but we went back to our grant partners that helped create the document. That was significant. We added some sample pieces in there, so we got them signed and executed. Yeah.
So, I guess last year we passed a budget that had a deficit, and then it seems like we're going to net out like somewhere with a small surplus. We have roughly. this is all based on actuals. So you feel like this is a pretty, I mean, it feels like it's a pretty conservative, it's certainly more conservative than it's been the last couple of budgets, right? So it's based on actuals that were real for this year, and it's sort of barely inflationary increases essentially on almost all that. Is that how you read this?
So when you say conservative, I will say more in line with what we expect.
Yeah, right.
Less cushion, less
Sure.
padding.
Yeah.
So, yeah, sorry, just making sure.
No, yeah, yes.
Yeah,
We're saying
I would tell you, I think the numbers presented today are going to be more in line with where we'd expect them to be.
Yeah.
They will have a little bit, like there's that reserve allocation that gives us the ability to move. But we've tried to shrink from budget to actual, and there's always a difference there. So we're trying to bring that a little bit closer. So that budget isn't 50,000 and what we spend is 20,000, right? So that maybe in that instance, it's more in line with 25,000 with a little bit of room, or, something in that range. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and thanks for, that's a better way to describe than the word conservative, thank you. So the way I'm processing this is I'm looking at this going, it seems like we have a budget that's basically the basics. And there's maybe around, if there's I'm guessing some sort of like shared solution on the economic development, housing piece. So there's like a little bit more staff capacity potentially, or maybe it's one FTE. But from any other dollars for any other, there's not any bells or whistles. Like this is just a basic, straightforward budget, and that if anything, we have some significant capital costs coming. So it's not like we're looking at this going, okay, if you're flat this year, and at the finance committee meeting, we talked about how we serve, there are some natural ebbs and flows, but then now you're talking about getting on a straight line, and then there's not like a reason to think, oh, now we get to have fun in 2 years. It's like, no, this is just the basics, and this is, you do the basics with these revenue sources, and if the revenue sources don't change, meaning we need a levy, meaning we need our income tax, we need our property tax, then we can hold the line. There's not like a bunch of extra. Is that correct?
Correct. And I think the biggest message that I want to say is we have got the basics baked in until we get the strategic plan to know where we're going. Because without the plan, we don't know where we're going. We can just throw money everywhere, but we still don't know where we're going. We want to get back to the basics, get the strategic plan in place so we know that the money, the staff, and the plan all align at the same time.
Yeah, I think that's great. And that's why I didn't bring anything. Because I was like, it seemed like from the finance committee meeting that we had a baseline, we don't have a strategy, so let's do the baseline, and then if other things come up, then we'll figure it out then. Yeah, I think I'll just say that. That's my overall, looks good to me. I just want to make sure that my overarching understanding is in line with what you were saying.
So Johnny, just one thing that's in my mind is, on electric, we do still have money in the electric fund to move to capital, right?
I'll answer that in a couple days.
That's fine. Because I know there's always been that chunk of money in there, or what seems like, so.
We've done a lot.
Okay.
Remember, we've done meters, we've done codes, we're using it. We bought reclosures, so. One big thing is, remember, we brought in staff to eliminate contractors. So that's
And since you brought that up, I'll just ask, I guess, real quick. I'm assuming that you've scoured this for that kind of opportunity, and you don't see any?
as far as adding staff?
Yeah.
I can add staff all day long. Do I think it's proper to do it right now? No.
Okay. The other thing we talked about in the finance committee meeting, just so other council members are aware and other staff members are aware, is that we did ask about seeing at the finance committee level some more information about wages, just for the purpose of understanding how our wage scales look so that we recognize that there's not a, there's not a union, there's not a bargaining unit, that there are, implications of how our salary scales look compared to, department heads and whatever. So just so that everybody's aware that that's a piece that we'll be looking at too.
And I think that would kind of in line with the strategic plan as well, right? Kind of.
Yeah, I think really what I was getting at is more like a wage analysis, right?
Yeah, just based, and the short version is village manager pay has gone up, and I'm not sure that other parts of pay have gone up at the same share. And that's me not saying that I think village managers pay too much. If you remember when we did the process, I generally am an advocate for higher pay across the board, but that I'm not sure that's happening across the board. And so I think we should just talk about it, because if one starts going up too much and other ones aren't going up too, you end up with discrepancies that can be a real problem. And then there's also there's internally, and then there's the us compared to others, which we started looking at initial COLA numbers at Finance Committee too. So anyway, I'm just letting y'all know that there is an awareness that these are dynamics that are baked in here. That's all.
Can we get HR?
We're working on it. I don't know that, yeah. I don't know that it's going to happen this year, but I'm working, yeah, you're right, correct. We probably have a part-time need versus a full-time.
Yeah, here till what, 26, I think?
You're here till like 40. Years.
That means he likes you.
So I guess if that's it for this meeting. Any more questions?
Is anybody?
Sorry, I'm speaking for you.
Folks were just going on and